I brought the sponge cake my son used to love to his wedding anniversary party, and my daughter-in-law threw a rag straight in my face. Wipe the floor, old maid. But what she didn't know was that I'd found her secret basement where her entire money laundering scheme was hidden. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss our next jaw-dropping episodes. The invitation came on a Wednesday, delivered in a thick ivory envelope with gold trim, the kind used for weddings, fundraisers, and overly polished celebrations. Charlotte Campbell didn't need to read the return address to know who it was from. Her son Daniel never chose stationery that fancy, not when he was 10, and scribbled birthday notes on paper napkins, not when he was 35 and firing off text message reminders about Thanksgiving dinner. No, this had Alexis written all over it, figuratively and literally. The gold-embossed names read, Daniel and Alexis, Whitmore Campbell, cordially invite you to celebrate 5 years of partnership, love and success. Saturday, 6:30 p.m., the Magnolia House, Seattle. 5 years. Charlotte read it twice, let the number linger. Long enough for a career to rise. Short enough for love to be confused with strategy. She set the card down on the kitchen table beside her chipped porcelain teacup and stared out the window. The late October sky was cloudless, but the wind rattled the old maple tree just outside, tossing orange leaves across the deck she'd stained herself last summer. The house was quiet, always was now. Just her and the occasional creak of wood that reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. She folded the invitation carefully and tucked it between the pages of her old recipe book, not because it meant anything, just because it had nowhere else to go. On Saturday morning, Charlotte rose early. She didn't need to. Her internal clock, calibrated by decades of motherhood, widowhood, and work, had long since made alarm clocks obsolete. By 7 a.m., she was in the kitchen, flour on her hands, measuring sugar with the precision of an accountant, which once upon a time she had been. The bundt pan sat like a relic on the counter. It had served birthdays, anniversaries, and just because Sundays when Daniel was young, it still bore the slight dent from when he dropped it during a teenage attempt at making pancakes. Charlotte smiled at the memory. Her hands moved almost by instinct, whisk, pour, fold, bake. The scent of cinnamon and apples filled the kitchen, creeping up the stairs and curling around the corners of the modest home like a memory trying to comfort her. As the pie cooled, she changed. Nothing fancy, just her best navy blue cardigan, pressed slacks, and a cream blouse she'd ironed twice. She checked the time. 5:50. Traffic into Seattle from the outskirts of Kirkland could be fickle. She wrapped the pie in a cloth towel and placed it carefully into the passenger seat of her aging Subaru Outback, then took a deep breath before pulling out of the driveway. The closer she got to Magnolia, the more the streets changed. Houses grew taller, fences, shinier dogs, smaller and better groomed. By the time she turned onto the cul-de-sac lined with birch trees and electric gates, she felt her fingers grip the steering wheel just a little tighter. Daniel's house, no Alexis's house, sat at the end of the street like a showroom display. All white brick and dark trim, symmetrical landscaping, and motion-triggered lighting. Charlotte parked alongside a gleaming black Tesla and a silver Range Rover, her faded Outback looking like a misplaced relic from a previous life. She stepped out slowly, gathering the pie with both hands, careful not to smudge the towel with her palms. As she approached the tall double doors, they swung open with mechanical grace. Charlotte, Alexis said, smiling without smiling. Her lipstick was dark, her dress a sleek sheath of emerald satin. You made it. Of course, Charlotte said, adjusting her blouse at the collar. And I brought something for the table. She held out the covered pie like an offering. Alexis tilted her head, regarding it like a foreign object. Oh, she said after a beat, how sweet. Charlotte caught the hesitation, noted the glance Alexis gave the pie. Too much cinnamon, too little refinement. Homemade, Alexis asked, as if verifying its worth. Of course. Alexis took it with her fingertips and turned. Well, the caterers have already prepared a full dessert bar, but maybe we can find a corner for this. Charlotte followed her inside the foyer, echoing under her heels. Everything gleamed: marble floors, brass light fixtures, a staircase that curled like a ribbon. Daniel appeared from the far end of the hallway dressed in a tailored suit she hadn't seen before, hair slicked back with more care than usual. "Mom," he said, his face lighting up with a boyish softness that hadn't yet been trained out of him. "You look great." He moved to embrace her, and for a brief moment everything softened. His scent was unfamiliar, something citrusy and expensive. She patted his back lightly. "I'm so glad you're here," he added. "Wouldn't miss it," she said, stepping back to study him. "You clean up nice." He chuckled. "Alexis said it's black tie optional, so naturally it's mandatory." Charlotte smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let me take your coat," he offered. She handed it over, then glanced around the open-concept living space. High ceilings, white couches, modern art with no faces, no family pictures, not even a wedding portrait. It looked like a magazine spread curated impersonal, sterile. "How have things been?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth, then paused. "Busy. You know how Alexis is. She keeps us on our toes." Charlotte nodded, watching him walk toward the kitchen with the pie, only to be intercepted by a server in a tuxedo who promptly took it and disappeared. "So," Alexis said, returning with 2 champagne flutes. "Have you been keeping busy, Charlotte, still doing your little consulting?" Charlotte took the glass, biting the inside of her cheek. "Still working with a few small firms," she said, "helping them get their books in order." Alexis smiled faintly. "That's adorable. I wish I had time for hobbies." Before Charlotte could respond, another couple approached, and Alexis immediately turned away, looping her arm through Daniel's and gliding off like a hostess in a commercial. Charlotte was left standing by the fireplace, flute in hand, unsure where to place herself. She wandered toward the edge of the living room, pretending to admire a minimalist sculpture she didn't understand. The guests were all in their 30s and 40s, tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, wellness influencers. Everyone knew each other. Everyone sipped something. Charlotte stood quietly, scanning the crowd. Daniel was laughing, but it was the kind of laughter that doesn't show in the eyes. Alexis floated beside him, flawless and hollow. The way she gripped his arm reminded Charlotte of someone clinging to a prize. The pain came slowly, a dull ache in her chest. Not jealousy, not even sadness. Something more complicated, like regret. Like standing in a museum watching your own child become an exhibit in someone else's curated life. A waiter passed with a tray of amuse-bouche Charlotte couldn't pronounce. She took one and held it, unsure what it was. The music pulsed softly in the background, jazzy ambient, just loud enough to remind her she didn't belong. A voice brought her back. "You found the art corner." Charlotte turned. A tall woman in an all-black jumpsuit sipped from a coupe glass and smiled. "I'm Harper," the woman said. "Friend of Alexis, design consultant. You." "Charlotte, Daniel's mother." Harper blinked. "Oh, wow, you don't look—" She stopped herself. "You just look grounded." Charlotte chuckled. "That's a polite way of saying I don't look like I came from this world." Harper laughed. "Honestly, neither did I." They spoke for a few minutes about art, about the view from the back patio, about Seattle's impossible weather. But when Harper was pulled away by another guest, Charlotte returned to her solitary place by the window. She stared at her reflection in the glass. 70 was near. She could feel it in her knees, in the way people looked through her, not at her. But she wasn't done. She wasn't invisible. Not yet. As she turned from the window, her eyes scanned the room one last time, and that's when she saw it. Daniel standing alone, glass in hand, as Alexis gestured toward him, laughing, with a small circle of guests. Not with him. At him. Something tightened in Charlotte's chest. A flicker of maternal instinct, of old fury, rising like smoke. She watched Daniel nod politely, defer, shift his weight like a boy unsure of his place. Alexis leaned in, whispering something to one of the men. The group erupted in laughter. Daniel chuckled along, delayed. Polite. Charlotte looked away. Slowly, quietly, she made her way across the room toward the hallway with the guest restroom, past the staircase. past the buffet where her pie was nowhere to be seen, and that's when she saw it. At the very end of the hall, partially obscured behind a rolling bar cart, was a door. Not grand, not visible from the main room, a simple white panel door with a keypad lock. She paused. It wasn't there last time she visited, was it? Her eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, just to look, just to understand. Footsteps echoed behind her and she turned. Alexis stood at the other end of the hall, arms crossed, watching. "Bathroom's the other way," she said sweetly, but her eyes were sharp. Charlotte nodded. "Just looking." Alexis said nothing. Charlotte smiled politely and walked away. But in her mind the door remained, silent, locked, waiting. Charlotte didn't head for the bathroom right away. She wandered. There was something about that door partially concealed, subtly out of sync with the flow of the house. It was wedged into the end of a hallway where nothing else seemed to belong, not even the sleek rolling bar cart that partially obscured it. A white door, plain and nondescript at first glance, but Charlotte knew better. She'd lived too long and seen too much to ignore the signals her instincts threw like red flags. Her hand grazed the smooth metal edge of the cart as she passed it, eyes flicking back toward the party, making sure no one noticed. The music hummed from the speakers, and the sounds of glasses clinking and laughter echoed faintly down the hallway. Everyone was too busy playing their roles. And Daniel was swallowed in conversation near the wine wall, smiling that soft, hollow smile again. Charlotte reached the door. It had no knob, just a keypad, sleek, stainless steel. It blinked red twice as she neared, as if it knew she wasn't meant to be there. She leaned in, squinting. No dust on the edges, recently installed. No scuff marks on the baseboard, everything around it was sterile, untouched. She tilted her head. This house, though modern and cold, had a familiar skeleton. She'd been in it back when Daniel first moved in. The blueprints had no mention of a lower level. The foundation didn't support excavation at the time. Alexis had complained about it during a dinner, once said she wanted a wine cellar, but settled for smart storage. But this wasn't storage. This was something else. She reached out, touched the pad lightly, and felt the cold steel vibrate beneath her fingertips. Locked. 3 green dots sat beside the number pad. Triple authorization. Not just a passcode, possibly biometrics too. Her fingers itched with questions. Lost again. The voice came sharp like a blade wrapped in silk. Charlotte turned. Alexis stood at the edge of the hallway, hands clasped before her dress shimmering beneath the soft track lights. Her face wore a smile, but her eyes had turned flint. Calculating. Quietly assessing what Charlotte was doing where she was standing. "Bathroom's that way," Alexis said, nodding to the other corridor behind Charlotte. "Unless you're inspecting the architecture." Charlotte returned the smile. "I was actually admiring the bar cart. You always have a talent for arrangement." Alexis's heels clicked as she stepped forward. "This old thing, just something from an antique store in Portland. I thought it brought a rustic contrast to all this shine." She moved with purpose, placing herself between Charlotte and the door in a single graceful pivot. Casual, subtle, possessive. "I don't remember this hallway being here," Charlotte said lightly. "Or that door." Alexis tilted her head. "We had a renovation done last year. Daniel must have forgotten to mention it. He's not great with details." There it was. That veiled jab. So effortless it almost passed as a compliment. "What's behind it?" Charlotte asked, her tone still neutral. Alexis didn't hesitate. "Server room. You know how it is. Daniel has half his world stored digitally. All those secure files, encrypted databases, remote work stuff. Everything's wired now." Charlotte nodded slowly. "Must be important to need that kind of lock." Alexis smiled thinly. In this world, privacy is the new currency. There was something final in her voice, a boundary set with porcelain precision. And just like that, the smile snapped back on the pleasant glaze returned to her voice. "Well," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her dress, "we wouldn't want you to miss the toasts. Come back in. The party's about to get interesting." Charlotte hesitated only a moment before stepping back into line behind her. The hallway swallowed the door as they walked away, but the image of that cold, blinking keypad stuck in Charlotte's mind like a splinter under skin. She didn't know what was behind it yet, but she knew this: whatever Alexis said, server room files technology, that was a lie. And Charlotte Campbell had built a life on knowing when someone was lying. Back in the great room, the party had swelled. Guests circulated like champagne, bubbly and weightless, full of fizz, but low in substance. Daniel stood near the fireplace now, speaking to an older man with a thick Rolex and the stance of someone who signs things for a living. Charlotte took a seat near the edge of the room, positioning herself between a potted plant and a marble end table that smelled faintly of lemon polish. Her mind wasn't on the music or the guests anymore. She was still in that hallway, still staring at that keypad, still hearing Alexis say server room with too much fluency, too little effort. No server room needed a triple lock keypad in a private home. No digital files were worth concealing from a mother-in-law unless they weren't digital and weren't files. Charlotte's chest tightened as she watched Alexis reappear beside Daniel, slipping her hand around his waist and resting her head momentarily on his shoulder, the perfect image of elegance and affection. Except Daniel didn't relax into it. He stiffened just slightly, just enough. Charlotte caught it. She reached for the champagne flute resting on the end table beside her and took a slow sip. Dry. Brute. Just like everything else in the room. In another corner, two women discussed market downturns and crypto rebounds. A man in a velvet blazer talked about venture capital like it was a religion. Charlotte smiled politely as they passed, but her heart wasn't there. It was back in that hallway, turning over every detail she'd seen. A keypad lock. Triple auth. Seamless integration with the wall. No handle. No security label. And Alexis's eyes, the flicker of surprise, then calculation. She'd worked around frauds before. Years ago, back in the accounting firm, she had uncovered a client who cooked the books so well that even his board of directors couldn't spot the steam. Charlotte had known then what she knew now. The most dangerous lies were hidden in things that looked clean, controlled, quiet. Just like that hallway. Her hand went to her purse, instinctively checking for her phone. No photos. She hadn't had time, but it didn't matter. The door was real. The look on Alexis's face was real. And Charlotte's intuition, time-tested and ironclad, told her something was deeply wrong inside that house. She looked at Daniel again. He was laughing now, but again that pause, the disconnect, like he wasn't quite in the room. Charlotte stood. She weaved through the crowd without a word, heading toward the coat room. Alexis caught her eye from across the room, brow furrowing slightly, but Charlotte only offered a smile and a nod. "Leaving already?" Alexis called, voice carrying just enough to turn a few heads. Charlotte turned back. "It's been a long day, and an even longer drive." Alexis walked over, placing a hand gently on Charlotte's forearm. It was meant to look kind. It felt like restraint. "You sure you don't want to stay for dessert?" she asked. "I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." Charlotte held her gaze. "No need. I've already had my fill." Alexis blinked just once before her smile returned like a theater curtain. "Well then," she said, "drive safe." Daniel appeared beside her, confused. "You're going?" Charlotte softened for him. "You know me. Early mornings, early nights." He looked disappointed. "I wanted you to meet a few people, some of Alexis's investors, potential partners." "Another time," she said. "Call me next week." He nodded, distracted by someone calling his name across the room. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, then turned back to the party. Charlotte walked outside. The night air was sharp with the smell of sea salt and pine. She stepped into the driver's seat of her Subaru and sat in silence for a long moment, hands on the wheel, eyes unfocused. The pie was gone, probably trashed, probably hadn't even made it past the catering kitchen. She didn't care. Her mind wasn't on the party anymore, or the pie, or Alexis's dress. It was on that door. She turned the engine over. The soft rumble steadied her. As she drove away from Magnolia, the lights of the house vanished behind her, swallowed by the trees and winding hills. But Charlotte Campbell had already made a decision. She would return, not as a guest, not as a mother-in-law, as a woman who knew exactly what to look for and exactly how to expose it. The night was thicker than usual. Seattle's cloud cover hung low, suffocating the moonlight, cloaking the city in velvet dark. The roads glistened from a misty drizzle, and street lamps flickered like anxious thoughts. Charlotte sat behind the wheel of her Subaru parked 3 houses away from Daniel's engine off lights dimmed. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, not trembling but tense like a spring pulled taut. On the passenger seat lay a worn leather wallet. Daniel's once. He'd given it to her back when she first taught him how to budget. Tucked inside was a key, a slim silver duplicate she'd forgotten she still carried, hidden behind an old grocery receipt. She hadn't told anyone she was coming, hadn't planned to. But as soon as she pulled out of that neighborhood earlier, the image of that keypad door refused to leave her mind. A quiet panic built in her chest the entire drive home. And then around midnight, with her coat still draped over the banister and her pie dish untouched in the sink, she turned around. Now sitting in the dark, facing the glowing silhouette of Magnolia House once more, she was no longer second-guessing. She was going in. Charlotte opened the car door slowly, the hinges barely audible. She wore dark slacks and a charcoal coat, her graying hair tucked into a wool cap. No jewelry, no perfume, nothing that would glint under light or leave a trace. The security gate was still open from earlier. They hadn't reset it for the night yet, rookie mistake. She padded quietly along the flagstone path toward the side entrance near the garage. No motion lights, no barking dogs, no cameras that she could spot. Either Alexis believed she didn't need protection, or the protection wasn't for keeping people out. It was for keeping secrets in. Charlotte reached into her pocket and pulled out the old key. She took a breath and slid it into the side door's lock. Click. The door opened like it had been waiting for her. She stepped inside, shoes muffled against the marble. The house was silent but not empty. Somewhere a thermostat clicked. A fridge hummed. The mechanical breath of a home alive even in slumber. Charlotte moved carefully through the kitchen, avoiding pressure points in the floor. She remembered creaked under weight. She didn't need lights. She knew enough of the layout. Past the open dining area, past the grand piano neither of them played, down the hallway where that door had stared her down hours earlier. And there it was, still pristine, still glowing with quiet defiance. The keypad light blinked red in the dark. Charlotte pulled a small flashlight from her coat. Just a pen light, dim and focused. She crouched to examine the door again. Something new now, faint smudges near the base. Shoe prints, maybe. The scent around the door was sterile, artificial, a blend of ozone and ammonia. This wasn't a server room. She pulled the key ring out again. The old key Daniel had given her years ago. He probably didn't even remember doing it. It had fit the side door. Maybe, just maybe. Charlotte pressed the key into a nearly invisible slot beneath the keypad. Click! A mechanical sigh escaped the door. One green light blinked on. Then she held up her index finger and pressed it gently against the pad. Another click. Another green light. Her breath caught. One more to go. She leaned closer and whispered Daniel Campbell into the small mic slit below the keypad. There was a pause. Then a third click. All 3 green lights glowed steadily. The door unlatched with a soft but weighty thunk. Charlotte pushed it open. The air hit her first. Cooler, filtered, dry like a data center but laced with something else chemical, maybe ink. A short staircase led downward, 10 steps each illuminated by a faint blue strip of LED lighting embedded in the wall. She descended slowly, every step measured. The room at the bottom was nothing like she expected. Not a basement, not even close. It was a private office, no a bunker. Soundproofed walls lined with charcoal foam. A triple-screen computer setup hummed in the corner, screensavers spinning digital abstractions. Filing cabinets lined the wall. A high-end printer and scanner stood beside a shredder the size of a mini fridge. But what struck her cold was the wall of evidence. Pinned to a corkboard the size of a bed mattress were financial statements, charts, photographs, and a large laminated flowchart mapping fake investment routes. Red thread connected names to shell companies, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets. Her eyes scanned the tags. Silver Arc, LLC Holstein Ventures. Belize Whitmore and Shaw Holding. Charlotte took a shaky step forward. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear, with fury. Her son's name was at the center of at least 3 diagrams with arrows pointing toward forged signatures and compliance authorization. Beside the board stood a slim drawer labeled Video Logs. She opened it. Inside were dozens of flash drives, each labeled with dates and initials. She pulled one at random, 0312 DC. Her hand moved with trembling urgency toward the computer. It was unlocked, no password prompt. The system must have been on standby. The moment she plugged in the drive, the screen lit up. A video began to play. Daniel sat in a black ergonomic chair at a glass desk. He wore a navy blue suit slightly wrinkled. He looked tired. Beside him stood Alexis, one hand on his shoulder, the other flipping pages in a document binder. "You don't need to read all of it," she said in the video. "Just the summary pages. I already did the deep dive. It's the same language we used on the last deal. Trust me." Daniel hesitated. "I don't like that clause," he muttered. Alexis leaned in, brushing her cheek against his. "Baby, it's boilerplate. We're weeks behind schedule. You signing late is making the investors nervous. They're already calling me about delays. Daniel rubbed his eyes. Alexis's voice dropped syrupy. "Sign it, please, for me." Daniel flipped to the last page and signed. The video paused, then jumped to another clip. Same desk, different day. This time Alexis paced in the background while Daniel scrolled through a PDF on a screen. "I need you to backdate that signature," she said. "What, Alexis? We need it on record that it passed due diligence. If we wait for legal, the transfer gets flagged. We lose the window. That's illegal. It's semantics. No one's checking this deep, you know that. And if they do, I'll take the hit." Silence. Then reluctantly Daniel signed again. Charlotte stopped the video. She closed her eyes, pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her stomach twisted. Her son, her sweet, brilliant, often naive son, was being manipulated. She knew Daniel. He was thoughtful, soft-spoken, sometimes too trusting for his own good. This wasn't just bad judgment. This was exploitation. She began copying the files onto a drive she brought just in case. As the files transferred, she kept scanning the room. There were forged tax documents, dozens of them. Client correspondence marked confidential. A shelf filled with fake prospectuses, pre-written testimonials, even envelopes with fake company seals. It was a machine, a factory for fraud. And at the heart of it all, Alexis. Charlotte stared at the final page of a financial breakdown, a spreadsheet showing projected exit plans if the scam fell apart. There were names, alias identities, property holdings in Vancouver and Zurich, offshore funds, and one name in bold at the bottom, Daniel J. Campbell. Liability Clearance Plan Phase C. Her hands went cold. They had a contingency plan to burn him if things went south. She stood still for a moment, absorbing the enormity of it. A noise above. The house creaked, possibly natural, possibly not. She ejected the drive, pocketed it, and flicked the room's light switch off. Darkness swallowed everything again. She climbed the stairs quickly but silently, every muscle alert. Back in the hallway, she checked both ends. Still empty. Still safe for now. She closed the door, locking it with a faint click. Back through the kitchen, past the empty champagne flutes, past the remnants of a party that had been nothing more than a smokescreen, out the side door into the night. Charlotte exhaled when she was finally inside her car again. She locked the door, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. Her hands were steady now. She had seen the truth, and she would not rest until Daniel saw it too. Charlotte didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table as the sun tried weakly to pierce through the fog over Kirkland. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold hours ago. Her mind playing that video on a loop, over and over. Daniel signing documents he didn't understand. Alexis whispering commands in his ear like a puppeteer behind the curtain. And that phrase on the spreadsheet, liability clearance plan, like a dagger carved from ice. Her jaw clenched every time she pictured it. But Charlotte Campbell didn't panic. That was something she'd trained out of herself long ago, back when her husband died and the bills kept coming when Daniel was still a boy and grief couldn't pay for groceries. She'd learned then that fear was a luxury. Action was the only currency. She had the flash drive. She had proof. But what she didn't have yet was clarity. Her eyes flicked to the clock, 8:16 a.m. She stood slowly, deliberately. Went upstairs. Dressed in dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a weathered trench coat. She pulled her hair into a tight bun and tucked the flash drive into a pocket sewn behind the lining of her coat, an old trick from her brief corporate whistleblower days. By 8:45, she was in her car heading downtown. She didn't call ahead. She knew he'd be there. The cafe was still the same. Brick walls, faded chalkboard menu, the scent of espresso and warm pastries thick in the air. It sat on a quiet corner just off University Avenue, sandwiched between a second-hand bookstore and a flower shop that changed owners every 6 months. It was the kind of place that survived not because of marketing, but memory, familiarity. Charlotte stepped inside and scanned the tables. There by the window sat a man in a navy cardigan with salt and pepper hair and a nose buried in a leather-bound journal. Thomas Green, former corporate litigator, once one of Seattle's sharpest legal minds, and once long ago a man Charlotte saved from ruin. She approached the table. He looked up surprised, but only briefly. His eyes sharpened. "Charlotte Campbell," he said, setting the journal aside. "I was wondering when the universe would spin us back together." She sat, still using the same journal, still ordering the same cinnamon roll. They smiled faintly at each other, but Charlotte wasted no time. She leaned in, her tone shifting from pleasantry to precision. "I need your help, and I can't go to the police. Not yet." Thomas studied her face. He saw something there, something deeper than urgency, a quiet, coiled resolve. "All right," he said slowly, "tell me." And she did. Every detail, the invitation, the hallway, the triple-locked door, the bunker, the forged contracts, the videos, the spreadsheet, Alexis's manipulation, Daniel's blind compliance, and the phrase Phase C liability clearance. She laid it all out, her voice low but firm, methodical. Her eyes never wavered. She didn't need theatrics. She had facts, and a mother's fury wrapped in surgical control. When she finished, Thomas sat back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. He was quiet for a moment, sipping his black coffee as though letting the weight of it all settle. Then finally, "You're sure it's Daniel's signature?" "Yes." "And the documents?" "Forged. I've seen enough real ones to know." Thomas ran a hand down his face. "Well, he said this isn't a domestic dispute. This is felony-level fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud, RICO. If they can tie her to organized laundering, and if she's setting Daniel up as the legal face of the company, he'll be the one holding the bag when it all burns down." Charlotte nodded. "She's not stupid, she's deliberate. Every layer protects her, not him." Thomas tapped a finger on the table, thinking. "Do you still have the files?" Charlotte reached into her coat and slid the drive across the table, discreetly covered by a paper napkin. He didn't touch it, not yet. "Before we do anything," he said, "I have to be blunt. Please, if we go to the police now, they'll seize everything. They'll start a formal investigation, which takes time. Alexis will know within 24 hours. If she's smart, and from what you're saying she is, she'll have exit routes already in place. That spreadsheet you found is a fail-safe. If she even senses a storm, she'll vanish before sunrise. Daniel won't just lose his money, he could lose his freedom." Charlotte's mouth tightened. "Then we don't go to the police." "Not yet." Thomas leaned forward. "We build the case first. Ironclad, concrete. With timelines, financial trails, hard evidence. Then when we go public, it won't matter what lawyer she hires or which Cayman Island account she crawls to." Charlotte exhaled. "That's what I need. I need her cornered." "You're going to have to play a long game, Charlotte," he warned. "This won't be fast or clean." "I didn't come to you for fast or clean. I came to you because I've seen what dirty looks like." Thomas's face softened for a moment, just briefly. "Still the sharpest woman I know," he said. "Even sharper when it's about Daniel." Charlotte looked out the window. A man walked his dog past the flower shop. 2 teenagers laughed as they passed the bookstore. The world kept turning blissfully unaware. "I spent 40 years telling my son to trust his instincts," she said quietly. "But I never told him what to do when someone hijacked them." Thomas finally took the flash drive. "I'll make a copy," he said, "and I'll start running background on Alexis. I want to know where she worked before, who she worked with, and what companies folded in her wake." "Good. We'll need to talk to someone on the inside of her network. Someone she's scammed before or cut loose. I have a few names from the files. I memorized what I could." "Even better. We'll track them." Charlotte stood to leave, but Thomas reached across the table and placed a hand lightly on hers. "This won't be easy," he said. "And there's a chance, however slim, that Daniel won't believe you. Not until it's too late." She met his eyes. "Then I'll make sure it's not." By the time she stepped back onto the street, the fog had begun to lift. Charlotte paused on the sidewalk, pulling her coat tighter around her. The air was damp, but her skin felt hot. Every step she took now was towards something larger than herself, larger than a mother's heartbreak. She had always believed that love required sacrifice, but now she saw something more dangerous. Love also required confrontation, because what Alexis had done to Daniel wasn't just betrayal. It was theft of his judgment, his agency, his trust. Charlotte would not let that stand, not quietly, not ever. There was a rhythm to the work, a cold tempo that Charlotte had known intimately in another life. Numbers, dates, names, patterns. She'd buried that part of herself long ago, left it in the fluorescent office of her old firm after her husband died, and the demands of motherhood swallowed everything else. But now it came rushing back with a clarity that scared her. She sat at her kitchen table, Thomas across from her laptops, open coffee untouched. Pages of printed financial documents lay in rows like evidence markers. 2 whiteboards leaned against the wall, slowly filling with diagrams, company names in red ink, dollar figures in black, and Daniel's name circled at the center like the eye of a silent hurricane. "We're looking at a shell," Thomas said grimly, sliding a document across the table. "Whitmore Ventures, LLC. No permanent office, no payroll employees, no physical assets." Charlotte's eyes scanned the lines. It was all there, the fraud hiding in plain sight. A network of companies incorporated across Delaware, Belize, and the British Virgin Islands, each with overlapping directors, each receiving or transferring funds through anonymous trusts. Smoke and mirrors. "And she's listed as the managing executive," Charlotte murmured. "But the legal owner is Daniel." Thomas nodded. "On paper, he holds the controlling interest. That means when this collapses, and it will collapse, he's liable for the entire scheme, civil and criminal." Charlotte leaned back in her chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest like a stone. She stared at the names, the connections, the web of deception. "He doesn't even know what he's signing," she whispered. "He thinks he's helping her expand a real business." Thomas tapped on his laptop. This right here is where it gets worse." He turned the screen toward her. A flowchart appeared. Arrows pointed from offshore accounts to real estate purchases in Miami and Vancouver, then to cryptocurrency exchanges, then back again into Whitmore Ventures. "Classic layering," Thomas said. "She's laundering money, using inflated invoices and fake investor capital to cycle dirty funds through clean assets, then routing it back through Daniel's company." Charlotte's fists clenched in her lap. "He doesn't know," she said again, angrier this time. "Of course not," Thomas said. "He's the clean name, the American-born, college-educated, tax-paying, perfectly bland frontman. Nobody questions a golden boy with a stable job and a polished wife." Charlotte stood abruptly. The air in the room felt thinner now. She paced toward the window, looking out at her modest garden where the wind played with dying leaves on dormant soil. Everything about her life was small, honest. She'd worked for every inch of it. And now her son was being used like a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. "I need to tell him," she said, suddenly turning back. Thomas didn't look up from his laptop. "No." Charlotte's voice sharpened. "He's in danger. He's signing documents that could land him in federal prison. He deserves to know." Thomas met her eyes. His voice was low but firm. "And if you tell him now what happens, he goes to Alexis. She spins it. She'll say you're jealous, delusional. She'll show him doctored documents, tell him you broke into their home. And guess what? He'll believe her." Charlotte hesitated. Every word he said felt like truth rubbing against the raw edge of her instinct. "He's not stupid," she insisted. "He'll listen." "No," Thomas said, standing. "He won't. Not yet. Because he's not just in love with her, he's entangled. Emotionally, legally, psychologically. You saw those videos. He's under her thumb, and until we show him the full picture, all of it, with no way to deny it, he'll stay there." Charlotte's shoulders dropped, the weight of helplessness washing over her. Thomas softened. He walked toward her. "I know it hurts," he said, "but timing is everything. If you move too soon, she gets away. If you move too late, he goes down with her. We get one shot to pull him out clean. One." Charlotte nodded slowly, trying to calm the fire inside her. "Then we find every piece. We don't wait." Thomas smiled faintly. "Now you're thinking like the woman who saved my ass back in 2008. Charlotte allowed herself a thin smile. "That woman had more energy and less gray hair." Thomas winked. "That woman also cracked a hedge fund fraud in under 2 weeks. By the end of the day, their whiteboards were full. They had traced 5 layers of corporate shells, mapped 3 significant wire transfers, and confirmed Alexis's signature on at least 4 questionable contracts, all routed through accounts that bore Daniel's name as a secondary signatory. It was elegant, viciously elegant. Charlotte sat with the evidence and felt something inside her shift. She thought of all the times Daniel had called her for advice over the years, the college roommate he didn't trust, the recruiter who'd made promises that didn't add up, the landlord who tried to keep the deposit after the lease ended. He had always come to her when something felt wrong, but this time he hadn't, because he didn't know it was wrong. She stared at his signature on one of the printed contracts. It was slightly tilted to the left, the way it had always been since high school. He never liked using pens with smooth grips. Said they made him feel like he wasn't in control. Now he wasn't. Alexis had become his pen, sleek, deceptive, and steady in its destruction. Charlotte pressed her fingers to her temples. She was running out of time. "Tomorrow," Thomas said, "we dig deeper into the investor list. We track who's putting money into this illusion and where that money is going." Charlotte looked up. "And if we find real names, people she's actively scamming, we go to them, we warn them quietly. And if one of them is already in on it, then we know this is bigger than her." Charlotte exhaled. The pieces were falling into place, but so were the stakes. And if they didn't act fast enough, her son would become the fall guy for a criminal empire dressed in designer heels and startup buzzwords. No, not on her watch. It took Charlotte 2 days to build up the courage. 2 days of sleepless nights and cold coffee. 2 days staring at contracts bearing her son's name. Contracts designed to bury him alive beneath a mountain of financial deceit. 2 days of her hands hovering over the phone, heart-racing tongue held by caution. On the 3rd day, she called him. "Lunch?" she asked simply. Daniel hesitated. "Just the 2 of us." "Yes." A pause. "Then sure, I'll clear a slot." They met at Fremont Cafe by the water, Daniel's favorite. He used to bring his laptop here on weekends back when he was freelancing and full of dreams. The cafe hadn't changed. Wooden beams, a chalkboard menu, the same guy behind the espresso machine wearing band tees from a decade ago. But Daniel had changed. He walked in wearing a tailored blazer, a phone glued to his ear, jaw-tight eyes darting with impatience. He hugged her briefly, then took the seat across from her with all the distracted energy of someone who'd scheduled this in between 3 more important things. "Still love this place," he said, "even if the matcha's too bitter now." Charlotte studied him. There were shadows beneath his eyes, creases at the corners of his mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. He looked tired, but polished, controlled. "How are things?" she asked gently. He gave a rehearsed smile. "Busy. Alexis is pushing hard for Q4 investments. We're expanding the platform, so I've been on calls almost nonstop." Charlotte nodded. "You seem stressed." "I'm good," he said too quickly, then added, "Alexis says pressure's a sign you're close to something big." Charlotte stirred her tea. "Is that how you feel?" Daniel frowned. "Mom, if this is about the other night..." "No," she said, "this isn't about the party." He waited. "I need to ask you something," Charlotte said, "and I need you to listen without reacting right away." "Okay." Daniel's smile faltered. She leaned in, voice low. "Are you sure you know what Alexis is doing with the company?" Daniel's entire posture stiffened. "What do you mean?" Charlotte chose every word carefully. "Have you read everything you've signed?" "All of it." He blinked, then laughed once. "Seriously, that's what this is." "I'm not accusing you," she said calmly. "I'm just..." "No, actually you are," Daniel snapped. "You're implying I'm stupid. Or blind. Or what? Being manipulated." "I'm implying you should look closer," she said, voice still even. He leaned back, crossed his arms. "You've never liked her." Charlotte's stomach twisted. This isn't about liking her. This is about the structure of the company, the way assets are being moved. The account's in your name. I know what's in my name, he cut in. Do you? She asked. Because I saw documents that suggest otherwise. Daniel's eyes darkened. Did you break into our house? Charlotte didn't answer. He stood up. Unbelievable. Jesus, Mom. Are you really so obsessed with controlling everything that you're willing to sabotage the one stable thing I've built? This isn't stable, she said, standing too. It's a minefield, and she's leading you through it blindfolded. You're jealous. The words hit like a slap. You've been alone for so long you can't stand the idea that I've built something without you. Daniel hissed. You don't understand what it's like to trust someone enough to build something together. Charlotte's voice broke. She's not building with you. She's building on you. Daniel grabbed his coat. I can't do this. Daniel. He turned away. She stood still for a long time after he left, hands trembling, chest hollowed out by the sheer cold of rejection. Then she sat back down, opened her notebook, and wrote one line. Not ready to hear the truth. That night, Charlotte returned to Thomas's office, this time with more resolve than she'd had all week. He's in too deep, she said, setting her bag down. We move forward without him. Thomas nodded. Then we double down. They pulled out the floor plan of Daniel's house, identifying weak spots in Alexis's routine. Thomas had already planted a discreet audio recorder in the basement stairwell during a lost invite drop-off earlier that morning. At 2:12 a.m. the recorder pinged. Thomas patched it into his laptop, adjusted the volume, and pressed play. Charlotte leaned over his shoulder as the voices crackled to life. Alexis. And someone else male with a thick East Coast accent. She doesn't know, the man asked. No. He signs whatever I put in front of him, Alexis said. He thinks he's building equity. A laugh. Timeline. End of month. I need the money in the Singapore account before the auditors check Q3. I'm backdating the investment packet and pushing the dummy contract through tomorrow. You think he'll notice? He never has. Charlotte closed her eyes. There it was, on tape. Intent, deceit, conspiracy. And Daniel's name wrapped in every lie. She's about to move, Thomas said. She's prepping for an exit. Charlotte clenched her jaw. Then we corner her before she disappears. But her heart, the mother inside her, was breaking. Because even with the truth in her hands, Daniel didn't believe her. And the clock was running out. The invitation arrived in Charlotte's inbox under a different name. Private Investment Showcase. By invitation only. Location. The Argent Tower, 42nd floor, downtown Seattle. Host, Alexis Monroe. Campbell dress code. Business formal. No media. No recordings. Charlotte read it 3 times before forwarding it to Thomas. An hour later, she was sitting in his apartment, thumbing through a leather-bound folder he handed her across the table. You'll be Karen Winslow, he said. Managing partner of a boutique impact fund out of Vancouver. Clean digital footprint, vague online presence. Enough press blurbs to seem legitimate. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. You made me Canadian, Thomas smirked. The accent's optional. But Alexis won't risk vetting anyone too closely. She's looking for capital fast. That means she'll let down her guard just enough. Charlotte exhaled. And if she recognizes me, then you walk. No confrontation, we just wait for the next move. I'm not walking, Charlotte said. Thomas didn't argue. Instead, he slid over a USB drive. There's a chance her pitch deck will be loaded on the venue system. If you can get near the console, extract it. We need digital proof of fraudulent projections. Charlotte took the drive and dressed the part. Thomas added, We're playing high-stakes poker. She can't know you've already seen the cards. The Argent Tower rose like a shard of glass over downtown Seattle, reflecting steel-gray clouds and the pale sun that threatened but never delivered warmth. The 42nd floor was cordoned off for the event. Private security champagne service, a pianist playing subtle renditions of Radiohead in the corner. Charlotte entered alone. She wore a navy blazer with clean shoulders, pearl earrings, and her late husband's Rolex polished just enough to catch the light without screaming for attention. Her gray hair was swept into a sleek twist, her makeup exacting and understated. She looked every bit the wealthy investor accustomed to quiet power. At the registration table, a young woman with a clipboard smiled brightly. Name, Karen Winslow, Charlotte said. She was handed a name badge and a glass of chilled Prosecco. No one asked questions. Inside the room, the air buzzed with polite ambition. investors chatting in low tones, small clusters forming around glossy handouts and models of the upcoming Echo platform. It was Alexis's newest scheme, Charlotte had learned, a decentralized portfolio management system with built-in AI risk calibration, a pitch vague enough to sound revolutionary and familiar enough to attract people who wouldn't ask the right questions. And then Charlotte saw her, Alexis, in a black pantsuit, heels that clicked like metronomes, and a diamond pin gleaming at her collarbone. She moved through the room like a shark, through still water, smiling, charming, tapping shoulders, with just enough intimacy to signal dominance. Charlotte felt her breath catch, not because she was afraid, because she was ready. She moved slowly toward the AV console near the back of the room. 2 staff members chatted casually nearby, distracted by a glitch in the slide preview monitor. Charlotte set her glass on a nearby table, pulled a small compact from her clutch, and pretended to check her lipstick in the mirror as she leaned subtly over the control panel. 1 USB port. She plugged in the drive. The screen blinked. Transfer in progress. 30 seconds. 20. A shadow crossed her peripheral vision. Charlotte didn't turn. "Excuse me," a voice said. Her spine stiffened. The accent, the cold sweetness. "Alexis." Charlotte turned slowly, lips already in a gentle smile. "Yes." Alexis stared at her, confused. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't believe we've met," she said. Charlotte extended a hand. "Karen Winslow, Winslow Impact Fund. I was invited by one of your seed round contacts, Mr. Levin." A flicker of recognition or calculation passed over Alexis's face. "Oh, yes. Roger." She smiled, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't expect him to send anyone." Charlotte laughed lightly. "He didn't. I was in town for the week and heard about the showcase. I asked to attend." Alexis nodded slowly. "Well, I'm glad you did. We're always excited to meet new partners." Charlotte stepped slightly aside, shielding the USB with her clutch. A small green check flashed on the monitor behind her. "Transfer complete." She turned fully to face Alexis, smooth and calm. "I'm eager to hear the pitch," she said. "You'll find it disruptive," Alexis replied. "Oh, I expect nothing less." Their eyes locked. Charlotte's blood hummed with adrenaline. Alexis didn't recognize her. Not yet. But the ice was cracking. An hour later, the presentation began. Alexis took the stage with practiced charisma. Her voice filled the room with confident cadence, pacing back and forth before the sleek LED screen now projecting a slideshow Charlotte had already downloaded. Charts, numbers, buzzwords, a showcase of scale and reach that didn't align with any of the real data Thomas had tracked. Projected user acquisition 200,000 in 6 months. Partnerships undisclosed but imminent. ROI north of 25% annually. It was smoke, dressed up as fire. Charlotte watched the crowd. A few nods, a few scribbled notes. No questions yet. That was the danger. No one wanted to be the first to doubt a pretty promise. As the presentation wrapped, Alexis invited a few select guests for a private Q&A. Charlotte declined politely, citing a flight to catch. She walked calmly to the elevator, nodded at the security guard, and stepped inside. Only when the doors closed did she let herself breathe. She had the pitch deck, complete with metadata, timestamps, false projections, and one very specific proof of value slide that referenced a non-existent licensing deal. Back in the parking structure, she slid into her car and dialed Thomas. "I got it." "Send it over encrypted," he said. "We'll verify the fabrication." "She didn't recognize me," Charlotte added almost with disbelief. "She's not looking backward," Thomas said. "She's too busy running forward." By the next morning, Thomas had printed and annotated the entire pitch. He tapped the page with the fake licensing claim. "This one gets her disbarred from any financial institution." That logo she used, it's from a company that hasn't existed since 2017. He held up another. "And this ROI claim is based on recycled data from a white paper she stole from a startup she never even worked with." Charlotte scanned the rest. "This is enough." "Enough to present to a DA," Thomas nodded. "And enough to scare the hell out of her investors when we go public." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "What's this?" "Preliminary legal packet. Filed affidavits. Financial trails. Your eyewitness statement. The audio, the video, and now this deck." Charlotte placed a hand on the envelope. "You sure this will hold? I'm sure it'll shake the tree hard enough to bring everything down." Charlotte looked out the window. 2 weeks ago, she was baking cakes and being called quaint. Now she held the matchbook to a corporate inferno. The end game was in sight, but Alexis didn't know that yet, and that was the only edge they had left. The ballroom at the Arcturus Grand Hotel glittered with ambition. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in gold. Every corner was dressed with velvet drapes, soft lighting, and the low hum of conversation that only money could produce. Waiters in tuxedos moved like shadows, offering trays of champagne and caviar bites to clusters of venture capitalists, tech executives, and media figures. It was Alexis's masterpiece. The event was called Night of Innovation, Where the Future Begins. Her latest spectacle to dazzle Seattle's elite mask, the fraud, and cast her persona as a visionary queen of the blockchain frontier. She arrived just before 8 p.m., swan-like in a floor-length silver gown, her hair in a coiled twist, diamonds dancing at her ears. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the small stage at the center of the circular ballroom. Behind her, a massive curved screen pulsed with visuals, neon tokens, algorithmic clouds, promises of a financial utopia. Charlotte stood near the back of the room in a simple black dress, blending in with the older investors and silent partners. Her posture was still, her eyes sharp. In her hands, a small sleek remote and a legal envelope pressed flat against her clutch. She had not come to watch. She had come to end it. Alexis took the microphone, her voice warm and commanding. "Tonight, we take another step toward decentralizing the future," she said. "Blockchain isn't just a technology. It's a philosophy, a rebellion, a return of power to the people." The audience applauded. Charlotte watched their faces, enthralled, eager. None of them had seen the scam for what it was yet. Alexis gestured to the screen. "With our upcoming launch of Echo Dynamics, we will reach over 200,000 verified users by Q2 of next year. We've secured preliminary interest from major hedge funds, and our IP partnerships are in final negotiation." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. The lie was smooth, polished, beautiful even, and now it would fall apart. She took one step forward, then another. She moved through this crowd quietly until she was standing just a few feet from the stage. Alexis caught sight of her and paused. It was like watching a snake sense smoke. The smile on her lips didn't change, but her eyes narrowed. Charlotte stepped up onto the stage. The room fell quiet. "Excuse me," Charlotte said into a second mic. Her voice rang clear, deliberate. "Before you write another check tonight, I think you deserve the truth." Gasps. Murmurs rippled like wind through a wheat field. Alexis stepped forward. "I'm sorry, this woman is—" Charlotte raised her hand. "I'm Charlotte Campbell, mother of Daniel Campbell, legal owner on paper of 68% of the capital flow connected to Whitmore Ventures and Echo Dynamics." Silence. She clicked the remote in her hand. The screen behind Alexis flickered. Gone were the glowing graphics and data points. Instead, the video. Daniel sitting in this glass office, eyes tired, Alexis's hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to read all of it," Alexis said in the recording. "It's boilerplate." Then the second clip. "Backdated. We'll lose the window." Audience gasps. Charlotte pressed again. Next slide, a flowchart of shell companies and bank transfers. Arrows, names, offshore accounts. She let it hang there, then spoke again. "These contracts are fraudulent. These investment projections are fictional. This entire venture is a shell built on forged documentation and stolen identity." And security began to stir. But then from the ballroom entrance, 2 uniformed officers stepped in, and beside them Thomas Green. He held a legal folder. Alexis's mask cracked. "None of this is real," she snapped. "This woman is unstable. She broke into my home." Thomas stepped forward. "This woman, Ms. Campbell, is the whistleblower in a federal securities fraud case. The documents have been verified. The recordings have been authenticated." He handed the folder to one of the officers. Alexis took a single step back. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed. Charlotte stepped closer. "No, Alexis. You didn't know who you were playing with." The officer moved to her side. "Alexis Monroe." "Campbell," he said clearly, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Gasps, shouts, phones lifted into the air. Alexis tried to run. 2 officers grabbed her arms. "No, no, this is a mistake, Daniel," she screamed. "Tell them this is just business." Daniel, standing frozen near the exit, said nothing. She was cuffed on the spot, and for the first time in years, Charlotte felt like she could breathe. The lie was over. The mask was off, and justice had finally stepped into the light. Daniel didn't move, not when the last frame of the video ended, not when the ballroom lights slowly brightened, not when the crowd dispersed like stunned ghosts, leaving behind half-sipped champagne and fragments of shattered illusion. He just stood there, shoulders collapsed, eyes locked on the screen though it had long since gone black. Charlotte approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. His back was to her, his hands limp at his sides. The man who once held dreams in his fingertips now looked like a boy again, lost, small wrecked. "Daniel," she said softly. He didn't answer. She stepped beside him quietly, offering her presence instead of answers. Then suddenly, without warning, Daniel crumpled. Not to the floor, but inward. His chest folded, his shoulders began to shake. He was crying, raw, ugly, silent at first, then louder, like grief forcing its way up from the pit of a soul that didn't yet know how to process betrayal. Charlotte placed a hand on his back. "Daniel," she whispered again. "I didn't know," he gasped. "I didn't know." "I know," she said. "I never blamed you for not knowing. I defended her," he choked out. "I believed her. I yelled at you, I said." She shook her head. "You don't have to say it. I remember. But I also remember what it feels like to be tricked by someone you trust." He turned to her, his face streaked with tears. "Why didn't you make me see it sooner?" She cupped his cheek gently. "Because you weren't ready to see me either." He looked down, ashamed, hollow. But she wasn't here to punish, only to catch him as he fell. "You don't have to believe me," she said, her voice calm and grounded. "You only have to believe the truth." That's when his breath hitched again, because the truth was louder than his guilt, heavier than his pride. It had always been there. In the documents, in the voice memos, in Alexis's perfectly rehearsed answers, but now stripped bare, there was no denying it. The silence between them stretched, then broke quietly, when Daniel leaned in and wrapped his arms around her. And for the first time in years, she felt her son hold her without shame, without distance, without needing to pretend. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her shoulder. "For all of it." Charlotte didn't answer. She just held him tighter. By morning, the story had already gone viral. 68-year-old widow uncovers multi-million-dollar financial scam. Seattle's quiet whistleblower brings down blockchain empire, the mother who stood still while the world fell apart, then put it back together. News vans parked outside Daniel's apartment. Reporters camped near the courthouse. Online forums lit up with amateur sleuths and digital vigilantes piecing together Alexis's web of fraud. But Charlotte stayed quiet. No press conferences. No interviews, just a handwritten letter delivered to a local paper, a brief statement thanking law enforcement, her attorney, and her son, who had the courage to rise after a painful fall. Daniel, meanwhile, had his own reckoning. He spent 3 days locked away in his apartment, going through every document he'd signed, every wire he'd authorized, every fake projection Alexis had convinced him to endorse. It was like flipping through a photo album of mistakes he hadn't realized he was making in real time. And then on the 4th day, he made a decision. He called Charlotte. They met at Green Lake Park. No fanfare. Just a bench by the water geese honking in the background, joggers passing by. He handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "Formal resignation," Daniel said. "I'm stepping down from every board, closing every account tied to her. I've hired an independent firm to audit all my assets. Whatever's tainted, I'm letting it go." Charlotte opened the folder. The paperwork was clean, final, irreversible. "I can't undo what I signed," he said, "but I can stop giving it power." Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, he wasn't polished or trying to impress. He wasn't the curated adult version of the boy she raised. He was just Daniel, a man learning how to start over. "I'm proud of you," she said. He smiled sheepishly. "You were right." "No," she corrected gently. "I was just early." He laughed softly. The wind picked up. The lake shimmered. Somewhere in the distance, a child screamed in joy, chasing a dog that didn't want to be caught. Charlotte folded the resignation letter and tucked it into her coat. So she said, nudging him with her shoulder, "What now?" Daniel leaned back on the bench, eyes on the water. "I don't know," he admitted. "But this time, I want to build something real." Charlotte nodded. This time he would. And this time he wouldn't have to do it alone. It started with one letter, typed in quiet admiration from a woman in Oregon whose father had been conned into signing over his pension to a fake investment fund. Then came another from a retired teacher in Colorado who saw Charlotte's story on the news and cried because she'd always been told to stay quiet. Then hundreds more flooding into inboxes and mailboxes, each one a testimony to how Charlotte Campbell's quiet act of defiance had echoed across the country like a silent bell. She never asked for the attention. She never craved it, but it found her anyway. A week after Alexis's arrest, Charlotte received a call from a woman named Gloria Pena, director of a national nonprofit based in D.C. called Sage Guard, a watchdog group that specialized in protecting the elderly from financial abuse and fraud. "We'd like to bring you on," Gloria said over the phone. "Not as a spokesperson, not as a face, but as a mind, a mentor, an honorary advisor." Charlotte hesitated. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an economist anymore. I don't even own a working printer." Gloria laughed. "You're exactly what we need. Someone who knows how to see the red flags before they turn into alarms." Within 3 weeks, Charlotte's dining room had become a small war room. Stacks of case files printed scam reports, hand-marked pamphlets. Daniel helped her install a second monitor and set up encrypted folders. She spent her mornings reviewing statements from victims, many too ashamed to tell even their children. Widows tricked into wiring life savings. Veterans conned with patriotic investment pitches. Grandparents guilted by fake online lovers. She saw herself in all of them, not as a victim but as a witness, a protector. She didn't try to fix it all, just flagged what needed attention. Wrote notes in red ink. Cross-referenced names. Identified patterns in phone scripts, highlighted links used across multiple frauds. Her inbox was now a blend of desperation and gratitude. They started calling her the silent advisor. Meanwhile, Daniel was learning to live small again. He sold the loft downtown, moved back into Charlotte's modest 2-bedroom in Green Lake, traded in his lease on the Tesla, and bought a 2008 Subaru. Got a job at a local startup, a clean energy analytics company with 12 employees and no illusions of unicorn valuations. He made coffee runs. He ran back-end reports. He didn't touch legal documents without reading them 3 times. Some nights Charlotte would hear him pacing the kitchen, whispering apologies into the dark apologies to no one but himself. Other nights he'd sit beside her as she reviewed her files, reading quietly, asking questions. He didn't need to rebuild everything. He just needed to rebuild honestly. One afternoon, while Charlotte reviewed a case about a retirement community pyramid scheme, her doorbell rang. It was a man from the county clerk's office. "We're serving asset seizure notice," he said, handing over a thick envelope. She followed him down the street to see it for herself. Alexis's former mansion, once towering in cold elegance on the Magnolia Bluff, was being stripped piece by piece. Movers carted out art furniture, even the wine fridge. A rollback truck lifted her imported SUV from the driveway. Plastic seals were placed on the front doors. A property under federal seizure notice was nailed across the gate. Charlotte watched from the sidewalk, unmoved. It wasn't vengeance. It was closure. Behind her, a neighbor approached quietly. "You really did it," he said. "Brought her down." Charlotte didn't smile. "I didn't bring her down," she said. "She built a house with no foundation. It was always going to fall. I just made sure she didn't drag anyone down with her." 3 weeks later, Charlotte was invited to speak reluctantly at a town hall hosted by Sage Guard and the Seattle District Attorney's Office. She stood in a room filled with mostly gray hair and cautious eyes. "No one wants to admit they were tricked," she said, standing behind a humble podium, glasses perched on her nose. "But I'll tell you this, being fooled doesn't make you weak. Staying silent does." Applause rose gently from the back. She continued, "I wasn't smarter than her. I was just stubborn. I refused to let the story end with me being dismissed as a paranoid mother." Pause. "And that saved my son." A hush fell across the room. Later, when she stepped off the stage, 3 people hugged her. One handed her a check for the foundation. Another just cried. Charlotte wasn't famous, but she was seen. One Sunday morning, while reading a quiet feature in the Seattle Times titled "The Strength of Stillness," How One Mother Exposed a $1 Million Fraud. Charlotte laughed softly. The strength of stillness, she murmured. Daniel looked over from the kitchen holding 2 mugs. Sounds about right. They make me sound like a monk, she teased. He handed her the coffee, then tapped the article. This quote, though, this part here where you said, all I wanted was for the truth to be louder than the performance. That's everything. Charlotte folded the paper. Truth doesn't have to shout, she said. It just has to stand its ground. Daniel nodded, and for the first time he truly understood the ground she had stood on for him, for herself, for every person who had ever been tricked into thinking they were alone. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but Charlotte Campbell was unshakable, and now quietly the world was learning to listen. The scent of vanilla and browned butter drifted through the tiny kitchen, curling through the house like a memory made solid. Charlotte stood at the oven, a floral apron dusted with flour, her hands steady as she turned the pan with practiced grace. The sponge cake had risen beautifully golden at the edges, soft at the center, its surface just cracked enough to hint at humility. She hadn't baked it for anyone in particular. Not this time. She just wanted the house to smell like something warm again. The last time she made this recipe, she had been mocked for it, called quaint old-fashioned. That night had ended in humiliation. Her son silent, her dignity quietly bruised. But tonight was different. The doorbell rang. She wiped her hands, untied her apron, and opened the door to find Daniel standing there, folder in one hand, a half smile on his face. He lifted the manila file slightly. I brought something. She raised an eyebrow. Is it cake-related? Better, he said. It's about starting over. They sat at the kitchen table, wood worn at the edges, tea steeping beside the still warm cake. Charlotte sliced 2 pieces and slid one toward him. Daniel opened the folder, careful not to get crumbs on the pages. I've been working on something, he said. A project proposal. For a community pilot. Financial advocacy. She blinked. For people who've lost control of their assets, he said. Elderly folks mostly. Victims of fraud, coercion, power of attorney exploitation. I thought maybe if we put together a resource hub, a platform that doesn't just inform, but walks people through the recovery process, we could stop the next Alexis before she even gets started. Charlotte stared at the pages. His voice lowered. And I don't want to build it without you. She looked at him, really looked at him. This wasn't guilt, it wasn't compensation. It was a man finally choosing integrity. You're serious, she asked. Daniel nodded. I want your name on this. Your mind, your gut instinct, the one that saved me. Charlotte exhaled slowly, then reached for a pen. They talked for hours, about frameworks, about trauma-informed counseling, about financial literacy modules and accessible hotline lines, about building a coalition not just with lawyers and social workers, but with survivors themselves, people like her. And as they talked, the sponge cake slowly disappeared between them, bite by bite. Outside, Seattle's evening bloomed into deep cobalt. The skyline twinkled with office lights and ferry beacons. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train sighed along the sound. Charlotte glanced at her son, his brow furrowed, sketching budget figures on a napkin, a second slice in hand. She smiled. This was never about revenge. It was always about redemption. Later, after Daniel left with the folder tucked under his arm and a plan etched in his chest, Charlotte stepped out onto the back porch. The wind was light, the air crisp. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone was playing jazz on an old saxophone. She looked up at the stars over Seattle, faint but present. She let the silence stretch. Then softly she spoke. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it starts with patience and a simple sponge cake. She closed her eyes, and in the quiet, for the first time in years, she felt whole.